Welcome to Dogo Argentino USA, the channel where we offer in-depth, beautiful content designed to enrich your relationship with your Dogo Argentino. Welcome, it's your host Nicole. I'm so happy you clicked on our video. In today's video, we are going to discuss the importance of dog anatomy. Understanding the value of Dogo Argentino anatomy will be extremely helpful to you. First, if you understand anatomy, you'll be able to evaluate a dog or puppy that you're considering buying. Second, being able to evaluate the dogs or bitches that you're considering breeding yourself. Third, being able to evaluate the individual anatomical components such as bones and muscles using correct anatomical terms to communicate precisely with judges, vets, breeders, breed enthusiasts, and the general public. 4. Being able to objectively identify, measure, and evaluate the balance and correctness of a particular specimen. 5. Understanding why all dogs have the same parts in the musculoskeletal system, the length, size, angulation, and power differ according to its variety. For example, a Dogo Argentino versus a Dachshund. Anatomy's purpose is to learn balance and correctness of not only our own Dogo Argentinos, but those that we compete against, breed with, and choose to purchase. Anatomy differs based on breed in terms of bone length, bone size, angulation, muscle size, muscle power, and knowing the length, size, angulation, etc. of bones and muscles gives rise to understanding the movement of the dog, for example, a sighthound like a Whippet versus a Dogo Argentino. Being able to identify parts of the anatomy allow you to understand how to properly measure your Dogo Argentino. You can measure height, bone length, and angulation, which allows you to evaluate structure, balance, size, substance, stance, and proportion in your individual Dogo Argentino dogs. All dogs have roughly 321 bones, including the skull, occiput. There are 7 cervical vertebrae, 13 thoracic vertebrae, 7 lumbar vertebrae, 3 sacral or fused vertebrae. There is the pelvis and 10 to 20 caudal vertebra in the tail, and that number varies based on the tail length. The other common bones of the skeletal system of the Dogo Argentino include the femur, fibula, tibula, calcaneus, metatarsus, phalanges, patella, olecranium, process, carpal bones, metacarpus, radius, ulna, humerus, the keel, also known as the prosternum, the scapula, the mandible, the zygomatic arch, and the foreface. When you understand the correct angle of the skeleton, you will normally find proper muscling. Muscle is more difficult to evaluate based on the fact that it is hidden underneath the skin. Structural balance in anatomy can be defined as having all parts of the skeleton and the muscles in proportion. Measuring tools include the height, length, and angulation of the Dogo Argentino. Height is measured as the top of the withers to the ground when the dog is standing on a parallel surface. The male Dogo Argentino should range between 24 and 27 inches at the withers, while the female should range between 24 and 26 inches. It's important to note that this breed standard is specifically the American Kennel Club, and each breed standard may vary slightly in terms of weight and height. The 2 most common ways to measure are either using the bony landmarks or using bony measurements. If you use bony landmarks, this is the more common way to measure, particularly in the breed ring. It will be 5 to 10 degrees less accurate than using actual bony measurements, which tend to be 5 to 10 degrees more accurate. In terms of the structural balance of the Dogo Argentino, one must understand that correct balance is based on function. One must evaluate the dog as a whole, and size, substance, stance, and proportion make up the basis of structural balance. Size being the height and weight, substance being the bone or the timber and heaviness of the bone, particularly the forearm, stance being foursquare vertical on the ground, so that the rear pasterns are perpendicular to the ground and the front is parallel to the ground, and of course, proportion. Stance, in a natural stance, actually is a more accurate description of structural balance than a stacked stance, because an experienced dog handler can disguise the dog's faults using a show stacked stance. So looking at the dog unposed in a natural position is actually the more accurate of the two. Daylight under the dog forms a shape, and in our particular case, that shape makes up the negative space between the bottom of the chest, the inside of the front leg, the underturned belly, and the front of the back leg. And that shape actually determines whether the dog properly stacked or not. Proportion. Most dogs are either square, off-square, or rectangular in proportion, which consists of angulation, coupling, and leg length and height. The Dogo Argentino is properly slightly off-square in its proportion. If a Dogo Argentino has legs that are too long, the body will appear too short. If, on the other hand, the legs are too short, it will appear as though the body is too long. If you have coupling that is too long, the body will appear long. If you have coupling that's too short, the body will appear short. Coupling is the space between the end of the rib cage and the front of the thigh. To understand the breed standard, whether it's written by FCI, UKC, AKC, you must have a basic understanding of anatomy. So, in order to judge a dog's correctness, there is a certain amount of objective measurement and subjective opinion. Why is this? Well, we can objectively measure bone length, but we have to be subjective about certain deeper structural parts, such as the muscle. I find that evaluating a Dogo Argentino is a combination of science and art. Let's talk about some of the things that you would evaluate. For example, if you are evaluating the head of the Dogo Argentino, you would evaluate the skull, the shape of the eyes, the stop, the dentition, the ear, and the bite. Eyes should be almond, and they should be oval shape with the outer corner coming to a point slightly higher than the inside corner. The stop on a Dogo Argentino should be adequate without being overly marked, such as found in the bulldog. In terms of the dentition, there are 42 teeth in the Dogo Argentino, 6 incisors on top, 6 underneath, 2 canines on top, 2 canines underneath, 8 cutting premolars on top, 8 cutting premolars underneath, and 4 upper molars per grinding with 6 lower molars per grinding. Now, the Dogo Argentino should have a scissor bite, which means the outside of the lower incisors touch the inner side of the upper incisors. Any other bite is a fault. The Dogo Argentino should have a properly set-on neck, which is thicker at the base than at the throat latch. The arched neck should have good shoulder angulation, which allows for more power in support. Let's compare and contrast a typical breed standard for the Dogo Argentino along with the breed creator's original standard. The Malosian or normal type, mesomorphic and macrothalic, within the desirable proportions without gigantic dimensions. Its aspect is harmonious and vigorous, due to its powerful muscles which stand out under the consistent and elastic skin, adhere to the body through a not very lax subcutaneous tissue. It walks quietly but firmly, showing its intelligence and quick responsiveness and revealing by means of his movement his permanent, happy, natural disposition. Of a kind and loving nature, of a striking whiteness, its physical virtues turn into a real athlete. The breed's standard from the original creator says nothing about the general description. Let's talk about size, proportion, and substance. As a mesomorphic animal, no part stands out from the whole, which is harmonic and balanced. Mesocephalic, its muzzle should be as long as its skull. The height at the withers is equal to the height at the croup. The depth of the thorax equals 50% of the height at the withers. The length of the body exceeds the height at the withers by 10%. The breed creator's original standard said of the face of the same length of the skull, and of the spine, also known as the top line, higher at the withers and smoothly sloping to the croup. Adult animals that have well-developed muscles along the back and kidneys, when seen from the side, look like an armchair and have a channel along the length of the spine owing to the relief of the spinal muscles. And a typical breed standard of modern types, the head. Of mesocephalic type, it looks strong and powerful without abrupt angles or distinct chiseling. Its profile shows an upper line which is convex at the skull because of the prominence of its masticatory muscles and its nape, and slightly concave at the forehead. The head joins the neck, forming a strong muscular arch. The breed creator's original standard said nothing. Continuing on the head, describing the cranial region, in a typical breed standard of modern times, the skull is described as compact, convex in the front to back and transverse direction. Its zygomatic arches are far apart from the skull, forming a large temporal cavity, which enables the large development of the temporal muscles. Its occipital bone is not very prominent due to the strong muscles of the nape. The central depression of the skull is slightly noticeable. The stop, slightly defined, as a transition from the convex skull region to the slightly concave foreface. From the side, it shows a definite profile due to the prominence of the superciliary ridges. Facial region as long as the skull. The original breed creator described the skull as massive, convex, both lengthwise and widthwise due to the relief of the chewing muscles and the muscles of the neck. The occiput, there should be no relief at the base of the skull because the powerful neck muscles cover it completely. The head and neck join in the form of an arch. Of the face, he says, it should be the same length of the skull, that is to say, the line that joins the processus or protrusions of the two eye sockets of the frontal bone should be equidistant from the occiput and the upper maxillary alveoli. Of the nose, a typical modern breed standard will describe the nose as needing ample nostrils, black in pigmentation, and it is slightly elevated forward, finishing off the concave profile of the muzzle. From the side, the front line is perpendicular and straight, coinciding with the maxillary edge or slightly projected forward. The breed creator said the nose should be strongly pigmented and black with a slight stop at the end, ample nostrils. Next, we would typically read in a modern breed standard that the muzzle should be strong, a bit longer than deep, well developed in width with sides slightly converging. The upper lip is slightly concave, an almost exclusive trait of the Dogo Argentino. The breed creator does not describe the muzzle. Lips. In a modern standard, we would call them moderately thick, short, and tight with free edges, preferably with black pigmentation. While the breed creator said lips should be short, tight, with free edges, pigmented in black, short lips are demanded so that when the dog is holding, he can breathe through the corner of his lip. If the lip is pendulous, even though the jaw is long enough, the lip turns into a valve cover when inhaling and closes the corner of the lips, which impedes the animal from supplementary breathing through the mouth during the catch, having to let go due to asphyxiation, like happens with the Mastiff. So a typical modern breed standard would say jaws and teeth. Jaws, strong and well adapted, no under or overshot mouth. The jaws should be slightly homogeneously convergent. They ensure maximum bite capacity, teeth big, well developed, firmly implanted, in line, looking clean without caries. A complete dentition is recommended, priority being given to the homogeneous dental arches. The breed creator standard said jaws well adapted without prognathism, strong with large well implanted teeth. A typical breed standard would read the cheeks as being large and relatively flat, free from folds, bulges, or chiseling, covered by strong skin. And the eyes would be dark or hazel colored, protected by lids, preferably with black pigmentation, though lack of pigmentation is not considered a fault. Almond-shaped eyes set at a medium height. The distance between them must be wide. As a whole, the expression should be alert and lively, but at the same time remarkably firm, particularly in males, whereas the breed creator said eyes dark and protected with eyelids rimmed with black or light-colored skin. Separation between the eyes should be great, with an alert and intelligent gaze, but at the same time with a pronounced hardness. A modern breed standard says ears high and laterally inserted, set well apart due to the width of the skull. Functionally, they should be cropped and erect in a triangle shape, and with a length which does not exceed 50% of the front edge of the auricle of the natural ear. Without being cropped, they are of mid-length, broad, thick, flat, and rounded at the tip, covered with smooth hair, which is a bit shorter than the rest of the body. They may show small spots, not to be penalized. In a natural position, they hang down, covering the back of the cheek. When the dog is alert, they may be half erect. Whereas the original breed standard was ears on top of the head, erect or semi-erect, of triangle shaped, they should always be presented cropped. A typical modern breed standard would say of the neck, of medium length, strong and erect, well muscled, with a slightly convex upper line, truncated cone-shaped. It joins the head in a muscular arch which hides all bony prominences in this part and fits to the thorax in a large base. It is covered by thick elastic skin that freely slips over the subcutaneous tissue, which is a bit laxer than on the rest of the body. It has non-pendant smooth folds at the height of the throat, a fundamental trait for the function of the animal. The coat in this part is slightly longer than the rest of the body. Whereas the original standard was written, the neck, thick, arched, and graceful, with very thick skin around the throat, making wrinkles like the mastiff, and not tight as the bull terrier. The elasticity of the neck skin owes to the cellular tissue being very lax. This allows the skin to slide along the fascia near the surface in such a way that the tusk, fang, or claw of the adversary only wounds the skin, and if another dog tries to grab the neck, because the skin is elastic and it stretches a lot, it allows the Dogo Argentino to grab and hold at the same time. A modern standard would describe the body. The length of the body from the point of the shoulder to the point of the buttocks must exceed the height at the withers by 10%. The upper line should be level. The withers and the pin bones from the croup are at the same height, constituting the highest points. The withers, large and high, back, large and strong, with fully developed muscles forming a slight slope towards the loins. The original standard, top line, higher at the withers and smoothly sloping to the croup. Adult animals that have well-developed muscles along the back and kidneys, when seen from the side, look like an armchair and have a channel along the length of the spine, owing to the relief of the spinal muscles, and the withers are high, very strong, of great muscular relief. The neck, top line, and body of a modern breed standard describes the loins as strong and hidden by the developed lumbar muscles, which form a medium furrow along the spine, slightly shorter than the dorsal region, rising very slightly to the top of the croup. The development of the muscles in the parts of the upper line cause the dogs to show a slightly depressed profile without being actually so, which is enhanced in adults due to the fully developed dorsal and spinal muscles, where the breed creator standard says kidneys covered by the dorsal muscle. The croup in a modern breed standard says of medium length, large and muscular, slightly showing the tips of both ilium and ischium. If its width is equal or a bit less than the thorax, the angle of the horizontal is of about 30 degrees, thus the upper line falling in a slightly convex slope towards the insertion of the tail. The breed creator's original standard does not specifically describe the group. Now, the chest, in a modern standard, broad and deep. The tip of the breastbone is level with the tip of the shoulder joint, the scapula-humeral joint, and the sternal line of the thorax is level with the elbow line. Large thorax providing maximum respiratory capacity with long and moderately curved ribs which join the breastbone at the height of the elbow line. The breed creator's original standard says chest, ample and deep, giving the impression of big lungs. Seen from the front, the sternum should extend below the elbows. Thorax, ample. Seen from the side, the extent goes below the elbows. In a modern standard, the neck, top line, and body has a description of the abdomen as being slightly tucked up beyond the bottom line of the thorax, but never greyhound-like, strong with good muscular tension, as well as the flank and loins. The breed creator did not describe the abdomen. The tail of a modern standard would be set medium high with a 45-degree angle to the upper line, saber-shaped, thick and long, reaching down to the hocks but not further down. At rest it hangs down naturally. When the dog is in action, it is slightly raised over the upper line and constantly moving sidewards. When trotting, it is carried level with the upper line or slightly above. The breed creator, on the other hand, said the tail, long, raised in an arch of ample curvature upwards. During combat, the tail is raised in a constant lateral movement like when the dog greets his owner. The length should try to be shortened to improve the harmony of the overall build of the dog, for which reason preference should be given to those specimens whose tails do not reach the hock. And in a modern breed standard, the forequarters, as a whole, they form a sturdy and solid structure of bones and muscles proportionate to the size of the animal, forelegs straight and vertical, seen from the front or in profile. The original breed standard describes the forelegs as straight and vertical with short, tightly closed together toes. A modern standard says the shoulders should be high and in proportion very strong with great muscular contours without exaggeration, slanting of 45 degrees to the horizontal. The upper arm of medium length, proportionate to the whole, strong and very muscular with a 45-degree angle to the horizon. Elbows sturdy and covered in a thicker and more elastic skin without folds or wrinkles, naturally situated against the chest wall of which they seem to be a part. And the forequarters continue with a description of the forearm in a modern breed standard, as long as the upper arm perpendicular to the horizon, straight with strong bone and muscles. The pastern joint must be broad and in line with the forearm without bony prominences or skin folds. The pastern slightly flat, well boned, slanting 70 to 75 degrees to the horizontal plane. The front feet rounded with short, sturdy, very tight toes, fleshy hard pads covered by black and rough to the touch skin. Hindcorners with medium angulation. As a whole, they are strong, sturdy, and parallel, creating the image of the great power their function requires. They ensure the proper impulsion and determine the dog's characteristic gait. Now, again, the forearm, pastern joint, pastern, and front feet were not described in the breed creator's original standard. Now, he does describe the rear legs, and he says they should be very muscular thighs, short hocks with short, tightly closed together toes without dew claws. The upper thigh in a modern breed standard is described as the length being proportionate to the whole, strong and with fully developed and visible muscles, coxo-femoral angle close to 100 degrees, the stifles set in the same axis as the limb, femoral tibial angle close to 110 degrees, the lower thigh slightly shorter than the upper thigh, strong and with similarly developed muscles. A modern breed standard describes the hock joint and the hock. The tarsus metatarsus section is short, strong, and firm, ensuring the powerful propelling of the hind limb. Sturdy hock joint with a noticeable, and the breed creator's original standard did not describe the hindquarters specifically. A modern breed standard would describe the coat as uniform, short, plain, and smooth to the touch, with an average of 1/2 inch to 1 inch in length. Variable density and thickness according to different climates. In tropical climates, the coat is sparse and thin, letting the skin shine through and making pigmented regions visible, which is not a cause of penalty, but in a colder climate it is thicker and denser and may present an undercoat. Whereas the breed creator's original standard said coat, completely white, the only tolerable spot is a dark or black one around the eye or on the head in front of the ears. All other spots on any part of the body must be disqualified as an atavistic trait. Dogos with white coats but with skin that is very pigmented with black should be considered as specimens not suitable for breeding because of the recessive trait that can become predominant in offspring if coupled with another specimen that has a dominant pigmentation defect. And of course, in a modern standard, color is described completely white. Only one black or dark colored patch around the eye may be admitted, provided that it does not cover more than 10% of the head. Between two dogs of equal conformation, the judge should always choose the whiter one. The skin in a modern standard would be described as homogeneous, slightly thick but smooth and elastic, adhering to the body through a semi-lax subcutaneous tissue, which ensures free movement without forming relevant folds, except for the neck area where the subcutaneous tissue is a little laxer, with as little pigmentation as possible, though this increases with the years. An excessive pigmentation of the skin is not accepted. Preference should be given to dogs with black pigmentation of the rims of the labial and palpebrial mucous membranes, not described in the original standard. And the gait is described in a modern standard as agile and firm, with noticeable modification when showing interest in something, changing into an erect attitude and responding to reflexes quickly, typical for this breed. Calm walk, extended trot with a good front suspension and a powerful rear propelling. At gallop, the dog shows all of its energy, displaying its power fully. The forefeet leave simple parallel traces. Ambling or pacing is not accepted and is considered a serious fault. And its temperament in a modern standard, it is cheerful, frank, humble, friendly, and not a hard barker, always conscious of its power. It should never be aggressive, a trait that should be severely observed. Its domineering attitude makes it continuously compete for territory with specimens of the same sex, most notably behavior in males. As a hunter, it is smart, silent, courageous, and brave. And I wanted to say a few additional things that are not necessarily breed standard, but more about anatomy. The Dogo Argentino should have a properly set-on neck, which is described as being thicker at the base than at the throat latch, and an arched neck with good shoulder angulation provides more power and support for the dog. Now, the top line and the back line are different, although they are sometimes incorrectly interchanged. The top line is from the ears to the tail set, whereas the back line is from the withers to the tail. At a dog show, you may hear a back line described several different ways. You may hear it described as a camel back, a carp back, a wheel back, a roach back, a flat back, saddle back, or slope or sloping back. So the withers, which are 9 vertical vertebrae, set the neck, shoulders, and the muscles and ligaments attached to the withers and give power. The chest and the depth of fill, which is the chest from the elbow to the forechest, should generally be of egg shape in a crosscut, and this allows for greater capacity for lungs. A barrel chest, which is a more rounded shape, actually limits the lung capacity and the heart capacity, thus not allowing the same amount of power due to a limitation of lung oxygenation. The brisket, which is also known as the rib cage, the lower breastbone, the chest, thorax, sternum, is basically a depth from the elbow, and it talks about how deep that rib cage is between the elbow and the bottom of the rib cage. And you want to have a certain amount of depth because it maintains elbow stability. Of course, the ribs are for breathing and determine the capacity for the heart and the lungs. And in general, about 45 degrees will increase lung capacity. There are 13 pairs of ribs. There's Ribs 1 through 9 are true ribs, which are attached to the breastbone. Ribs 10 and 12 are false ribs, and the 13th rib, which is the rib closest to the pelvis, is a floating rib. And when we talk about the spring of the ribs, we're basically describing the depth and width of the rib cage. And when we talk about the tail, we're really describing how that tail sits in relation to the back line or the top line. Okay, so let's roll into the feet. Feet are modernly described as cat paw feet. And what does that mean, or what is it good for? It means the toes are extremely tight, similar to an actual cat paw. This was designed for rough terrain. It increases endurance. The feet are described as compact, round, with well-arched toes, and this foot type is less prone to injury. There is a stud that's quite popular these days on the show circuit who does not have cat paws. That particular stud has hare feet, which means that the middle two toes in the front foot actually extend past the outer two toes on both the inside and the outside of the foot. This is considered a fault. So once you understand anatomy, you will understand correct movement, because efficiency is the goal of correct movement. And that's why having certain angles and lengths of bones and muscles determine the way the dog will move. So structural balance in motion is affected through muscles, bone length, leg length, angulation, and temperament. And there are movement markers such as the head carriage, the neck carriage, the foreleg reach, the hind leg extension, the back line motion, and the pastern flex or paw lift. And all those things are basically describing the way the animal moves and how efficient it is in that movement. So all of evolution is basically designed to make movement more efficient and to require less energy and therefore less calories from that animal. So that's why having you will sometimes hear in the show world that form and function are linked in a way that can't be separated. You get the function based on the form. And so having correct movement is basically all due to having correct anatomy. And if the movement is poor, it's because some part of the anatomy is not correct. So muscles move bones, and the skeleton is basically a bunch of bones that muscles connect to, and you have movement based on the muscles contracting back and forth. And so you have a set of muscles that pulls in the front, and then you have an opposite set of muscles that pulls in the back. And that's what allows the leg to actually swing forward and swing back, because all muscles can do is contract or release. And so in order to get that movement, you have to have a set that contracts and releases in the front and a set that contracts and releases in the back. Now, of muscles, we have three types. We have smooth muscles, and those work with body organs. We have cardiac muscle, which is, of course, the heart, and we have skeletal muscle, which are the muscles that attach to the bone. We have both superficial muscles, which are those close to the skin. Those are what the judge is feeling in the show ring, what you are feeling when you're trying to determine the structure or to measure bony prominences in the dog. And then you have deeper muscles. Those are the ones that are closer to the bone. They're harder to accurately measure because they're farther away from where you're actually feeling. And bone length is generally driven by two different things, angulation and reach. And speed is affected by the angle of attachment where the muscle is actually attached to the bone. And so those things will determine things like speed and gait. And that's one of the reasons that we actually have a breed standard that talks about the way things should be connected in terms of the angle of the bones and the joints. And we have this in terms of degrees because it ultimately comes down to correct movement being based on proper angulation and length. So as you guys know, I'm a super small micro channel I'm trying to grow. Please give me a like, a comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. It really truly makes a huge difference with micro channels. If I don't get that feedback, they don't kick on the algorithm and nobody gets to see my educational videos. So please don't be shy. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much, and as always, have a dogotastic day.